Talk, 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 talk. Art of the Zodiac presents Talk, 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 Talk. Okay, hello world. I am Vivi Henriette of Art of the Zodiac. This is Talk, 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 a weekly conversation podcast. Conversation masquerading as podcast dedicated to the radical art of conversation. And I am here today with someone who I greatly admire, Cameron Steele. Am I getting this right?
Steele.
Because it's Steele, but I've been saying Steele in my head, so I spell it right every time.
Yeah, makes sense.
Man,
yeah.
I fucked it up already. Okay, let me do that again.
No, you're good.
Introducing someone I greatly admire, Cameron Steele of Interruptions, who has is this your Mercury mug too?
It kind of is. It's got all the colors. It's a little bit chipped and dinged up. Yeah. Yeah. That's my Mercury mug, and this is my Stanley white girl bitch water because I'm bad at drinking water, and so I convinced my mother-in-law to spend $50 on a mug that's bigger than my toddler.
Oh my god, it is. It's when you were holding like that, I couldn't tell, but it is. It's one of those.
It's like literally, for scale.
So is that like that's your ration of water for the day? Is that what's happening there?
I'm trying to drink at least that much water a day. I'm trying to drink 2 of them a day. I'm really bad at drinking water, but yeah.
Fun fact, which you probably know, is that as we get older, the parts of our brains that tell us we need water start to shut off. I don't know if this is really early survival, let the old people die of thirst or something.
Yeah.
Resource allotment. But you kind of lose your desire to drink water the older you get. So, which is why you need to do things like carry around mugs to remind us.
Ooh, I wonder if that's why, in medical astrology, Saturn ruled moons, like Capricorn and Aquarius moons, really can struggle with dehydration from an early age.
That makes sense. And also too, thinking about Aquarius, water is water. Sorry, air is cold. Sorry, air is hot and wet. Is that right? I always fuck that one up.
I think air is warm and moist. I mean, different astrological philosophers say different things, but I think the way I've learned it is that air is warm and moist.
Warm and moist. Okay. And then thinking about Capricorn, which would be cold and dry. But either way, thinking about Saturn as being something that dries people out, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And the age thing too.
Yeah.
Have you studied this is a great unexpected way to jump in. Have you studied medical astrology?
I have not studied it under a teacher, but I am doing with medical astrology and with Vedic astrology what I first did with Western quote unquote astrology, which is that I'm studying it for myself, by myself, almost as a secret that I keep for myself. Because if I get too into it, I'm gonna just max out a credit card and go full on. I'm gonna study medical astrology and geotish and finish my 3rd year of astrological magic all at the same time, which is not doable. So I've been reading books on medical astrology for the last 2.5 years. The last 3 years, because it really seriously began as to become an interest and a need for me when I had my son, because he was born and he was immediately very ill, and his doctors didn't know what was wrong, and I was like, well, I'm going to go a different route then if you can't tell me. And then it was good. It was it's this idea that the right books come into your life when you need them.
Yeah.
Almost before you need them. And so I had sort of gobbled up almost everything that Judith Hill had written and was starting in on older medical astrologers too, when I was diagnosed with cancer. And then it was like, I was really glad to have that, because it was a third way of looking at disease and treatment.
Wow. So your son got sick first before you were diagnosed.
Yeah, he was, it was terrifying. He was not a healthy baby. And it lasted the first 9 months of his life. He was born in January 2020. So all throughout the pandemic, it was just like, and the medical industrial complex, I mean, we were seeing the best doctors at like the best children's hospitals, and all that they could say was they didn't understand why he wasn't growing, why he wasn't able to keep down breast milk or formula or anything.
Okay.
And so their only thing was like, well, we're gonna like hospitalize him and do surgery and put a feeding tube in his stomach, which he'll have to deal with for his whole life. And I was like, no. I was like, I'm looking at this baby's chart. And I know that there's this whole big thing, this conversation that's going on in astrology about like the ethics of looking at children's charts. And I absolutely agree with that. Like, we don't need to be like snooping around trying to manipulate our kids by looking at their charts. And at the same time, knowing his chart was such a tool for me, because we were able to avoid the travesty of that, and we were able to seek out the care that he needed by knowing what was going on with his stellium in the first house and what that might indicate for feeding and for growth. And like, yeah, and so we were able to seek out a specialist for his particular kind of disease outside of the US.
Yeah.
And meet with her over Zoom, and he's great. He's doing great. But it's just like, yeah.
Have you you don't have to get into details of his chart, but would you mind sharing some of the like what like how like what it clued you into, if that makes sense, without being personal?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I mean, like, so I've written about Theo's illness in literary magazines, like as a way to explore
okay.
The trials and tribulations of motherhood. There are things that I definitely won't say, but like, I also feel very strongly about him understanding his story and sort of like what his parents were trying to work with when he was born, so that he can have that narrative and begin to understand some of his own struggles when he gets older. So a lot of it was, so he's like the most heavily Capricorn baby I've ever seen in my life. Like, he's got this loaded Capricorn first house, like Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Pluto on his Sun, Jupiter, South Node on his Jupiter, on his Sun, all of this together. He was born just a couple days after that big eclipse, where it was like Sun, Saturn, Pluto, all of it. That sort of launched the pandemic. He's this, so that's sort of like one of the sort of weights that he'll have to carry around the rest of his life. But like, and then he has this Virgo moon, and that trine between the moon and his first house has ended up being really supportive. But as a child or as an infant, where like Virgo moons, like in medical astrology, can indicate stuff with the digestion, stuff with the gut, issues with the intestines, issues with sort of just the moving and the ability to break down and digest food properly. And then Capricorn has all of these contraindications for mineral absorption and for growth. And so to have like his malefic out of sect and Pluto on his Sun affecting his vitality in the first house, where all of these things are really important right away, with South Node, which drains away. So Jupiter's ability to like make big, to help grow, to like expand, while it's like negatively affected in all of these ways, right? Because Jupiter's in Capricorn. So it's in its fall. or detrimental, and conjunct the South Node. So that's sort of like, it's really good for this sort of spiritual, otherworldly knowledge, which my kid, even at 3, definitely has. Totally bad for nutrition. So it was like all of these things all at once. And also like being able to look at that and to know that, like, and part of it was like the Western medical industrial complex's inability to like look at my son and be like, well, maybe he's supposed to be a smaller kid, because all they saw was my husband's like extreme height, and like they just like wouldn't let him be his own baby. So like it was like pressuring him to eat more and more and more, literally from like the first couple hours that he was born, and his body couldn't tolerate it. So long story short, we used sort of my medical astrology know-how and then my academic training and sort of research, and my access to JSTOR and reading like research papers within Western medicine to be able to sort of match what I knew from his chart to match the kinds of rare issues with feeding and growth that children can have and also grow out of with the right kind of support. And we were able to then find the physician that he needed. Yeah. Wild.
Wow. Maybe this would be a
Sorry.
good time. No, I was just saying maybe it's a good time to give you a proper introduction. I think you just, aside from mispronouncing your name, Professor Cameron Steele. So you are a writer, astrologer, tarot. Someone was saying they don't like the word reader, and I can't remember if it was you or someone else, but tarot.
Oh no, I love reader. Like I like consider myself a reader of things.
Yeah. Okay. Tarot reader. I feel like I'm having a hard time introducing you because you're one of those people that you have so many titles. So you have the whole academic background. You're living off writing for your entire life, if I'm getting this correct. You've been a yoga instructor. So there's been this sort of threads, but these days you are a consulting astrologer, tarot reader. You have a really amazing Substack where you publish essays that sort of interweave literature and the sort of esoteric, the occult. What am I missing here?
No, that's great. I mean, like I love that I'm not the only one who struggles to figure out how to say what I do. Because like, I just, when I like am trying to be short and cheeky about it, I'm like, like I'm a reader and a storyteller. Like that's what I do. That's always been what I've been interested in. Or I'll just say like I'm a writer, but like the writing is part of reading, is part of being able to tell stories, obviously. And so that's like led me in a lot of different directions. So yeah, first as a reporter, an investigative reporter for daily papers in the Deep South, and then grad school where I got my PhD and taught literature, creative writing, and women's and gender studies for the last 8 years. And I'm teaching this semester because I'm trying to write my book and do the astrology and tarot thing, because that has really become the thing, the passion. Obviously, like literally like the sort of stakes of my life are tied to astrology and tarot, and figuring out how to help people who aren't within our community, right? But who like desperately need help and can't find, they can't find it in traditional psychotherapy or psychiatry or in families because families suck, or even in friends because we don't friendship because chosen families sort of crumble because of the way our world works. And also everyone's afraid of having conflict, so no one's really expressing how they actually feel. And so I'm like, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you tell a new story using these cards and using these planetary signatures. Yeah.
My brain, by the way, this podcast is called Talk 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 because my brain like meanders. So
Oh no, I love it, right?
I'm going to try to keep a thread, and I'm so excited. There's like 5 things that I want to sort of diverge on. But, it's interesting thinking about the sort of intersection of what astrology and tarot can do. Thinking about, I don't know why I've been having a lot of conversations about medical astrology recently, and how I'm like, my personal thoughts, it's absolute, like, everyone should have like a medical astrologer that they can consult with, so they can really think about their own health and constitution, because doctors, as you've mentioned,
Yes.
really, they just don't, we don't have a system that's built for it, right? Like, they want to
Right.
diagnose, but they don't spend time, they don't have an opportunity for nuance. And then there's the story part, and maybe, okay, I'm going to share this and then let you riff. But I, it's something I think about a lot lately. So similar to you, I work at like a crystal shop, like a old school psychic, right? Like, I'm the only one, I think, on the roster who doesn't, claim
Yeah.
to be a psychic or sort of mediumship. And so I get a lot of people who are desperate, who are just, it's like they're coming in because something's wrong. They don't, they don't quite, a lot of them don't even like astrology, because they're like, I just want pictures. I just want to be told, right? Like, it's not like, I'm definitely not dealing with my peers, which is fantastic. And I've sort of started calling myself like a black market therapist, because I'm starting to see a lot of the people who are coming to me don't have family support. A lot of times they don't have friend support. They're afraid of seeing therapists for many reasons, right? So there's this sort of this, and I think you're sort of touching on that. And, I talked to my therapist friends about that. And it's interesting because a lot of therapists I know are actually going private because of all the like red tape around the consultation. And it's interesting. I think that as readers, we have a very unique position, because even though we maybe don't get the respect of like someone with a therapist's credentials, we have the unique opportunity of being able to meet with people, and I think a open and vulnerable spot. Like, people come to us, and in a way, I think there's a sense of a little bit of like a magic trick of like, I'll say whatever, maybe this will work, I don't know. Like, they're not fearful that we're going to judge or institutionalize or give them drugs, or put something on the record. So it is a unique position.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I've been using the black market therapist term ever since I heard you use it, because I think it's so good, and I think it also gestures towards this sort of deauthorized mode of knowledge that the tarot and also astrology, although everyone in astrology, this is my truck with astrologers right
Yeah,
now of our generation. It's like everyone's scrambling to like have authority. And I'm like, no, dude. Like, one of the best things about like coming at the world through these perspectives of tarot and astrology being deauthorized modes of knowledge, who that don't have like the authority or the credentials of accepted institutions behind them, is that we get to avoid the red tape. We get to sort of weave in and out of these spaces of freedom that can be liberatory, not always, because
sure.
we're humans using astrology and tarot, and like we humans, we do a lot of bad shit once we
Yeah,
feel like we have any amount of wisdom or knowledge. But at the same time, it's like the very fact that tarot and astrology have been marginalized since the 17th century, persecution of these forms of knowing the body, the
yeah,
world, the self, the other, persecuted by both the Enlightenment, like science is God, like reason is the pinnacle of human achievement, like blah, 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 and also the Christian church, like fuck women, fuck witches, fuck um, being able to say that a plant is a god, just like, the moon is a god, just like, Jesus was a figure of God.
yeah,
So like, this sort of double persecution that happened in the 17th century, of course, was hard and terrible. And at the same time, it did a lot of good for for using tarot, for using astrology as a process of liberation for people who have always been on the outside um, of power who've always had the boot heel of power on their necks because they have been othered based on their class, race, gender identities, you know? And so it's just like, yeah, I mean, well, you know, like, like, obviously I strove for credentials in academia. Like, I'm
Yeah.
very obsessed with being taken seriously. And at the same time, I'm constantly trying to criticize or to be critical of or to eschew that need for being so serious all of the time. And I wish, you know, I wish that more millennial tarot readers and astrologers were on board with that too. Like, I hate the fight for normalizing stuff. Like, why do we want to normalize stuff? Norms are punishing. Like, let's exist outside of them, man.
Oh, I agree with you completely. It's fun whenever people talk about like, you know, we're going to have like the certificate. Like, I have another fucking certification. I want to just like pound my head. Like right now, it's obnoxious enough that you get a few people with power, and this is astrology, but I'm sure it's tarot, and I'm sure it's like any sort of, you know, writing, right? You get this like
Yeah.
sort of we live in the world of certifications where everyone with enough sort of popularity is like, get my certification.
Yeah.
And then but then we're saying, okay, but we need these bigger boards, these more, you know, uh accepted certifications. And you know, part of I think the idea of the occult, right, is it's hidden. I think there's something really special about
Yeah.
like, no, not everyone just gets to sign up and like there's something like really important in that, like in the component of being hidden, of having to struggle. There's something,
Right. Yes,
something
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're reminding me of something that we touched on a little bit when we talked last time, but it's this idea, and you know, like I'll quote from Johanna Hedda again because they're one of my favorite writers and favorite astrologers. But this idea that, like, um, as humans, like we all have to deal with the universal experiences of death and doom. And like, what is the difference between death and doom? And Johanna Heba has this really interesting metaphor where, you know, they're really into metal and they were at this like metal concert in LA and they're like, oh, the difference between death and doom is the same as the difference between death metal and doom metal, where death metal is fast,
yeah,
death is fast,
yeah,
but doom is slow. And so, like, we like if we orient ourselves to the fact that we're all going to die and that death is going to wink ourselves out as far as we know self to be, but that from the very moment we're born we're all living lives of being doomed because the body is always sort of moving towards death. Like, these are like really important things to grapple with, and like the occult and the knowledge and the wisdom that we can build out of the occult or occult practices, like, is knowledge that is based in the suffering of doom, of death, of like of slow and fast decay and struggle. And yeah, there's just this sort of urge right now to make that palatable or make it popular, and I get that because we're in this world where, like, we're just, like, struggling for fucking money.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
struggling for connection. We're, like, trying to, you know, get our footing in this sort of, like, slide off into we don't know what the world's gonna look like in, you know, 4 years, much less 20. So I get it, but it's also like, ugh. But I'm interested, so speaking of death and doom and all of this, like, so have you just recently, like, really gotten into medical astrology? I know that you've gotten a medical astrology reading for yourself recently. Is
Yeah.
that, like, a new interest or preoccupation? What sort of urged it on?
Well, a couple things. As a tarot in my tarot life, I have a lot of people who come to me and they're like, tell me about my health. And I've pretty much had like a
Mm.
no policy. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a medical astrologer, I have no medical background. Like, I could answer the question like anything else, but fuck, like if I don't want to be wrong. I could always be wrong. Tarot readers can be wrong, by
Yeah.
the way. I think that Camellia Elias says we always have a 50-50 chance we're wrong, right? Like live with that.
Yeah.
So like I don't. And but it's something that's always in my ear because I'm always getting it. I'm like, no, no, no. And I just happened to have a conversation with Queen of Hearts, Danielle Ashley, who's based in Australia, a terrific medical astrologer slash like Chinese medical practitioner, acupuncturist, who just one of those people who literally lives in like isolated part of Australia and just like reads books and studies, and it's just brilliant. And so I just loved her so much that I had a reading with her just to talk about like what's going on. And it was just so profound of like thinking about having had difficult experiences with doctors, with other people around me, but also like myself, just had like this fear of doc. It was the first fear of doctors.
Yeah.
It was the first time in my life where I could talk about my health in a way that felt like, oh, proactive. Like this person was seeing me, they were right on. And so it's just one of those things that it's just been kind of like a conversation in my life that I'm like, that it's just seemed really important. Not to switch the subject, but can I bounce back for a moment? To answer your question, by the way, I want to give you pause before I just rush off.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it did. I mean, I love what you're saying. And it resonates with me, like the way that medical astrology and conversations with really good medical astrologers, like, have allowed me to see myself as like a whole system
Yeah,
that sort of everything's sort of working together. And um, it's just, it hasn't been dismissive.
because we had a conversation too about how, I mean, I think when we did an IG live, and you were saying how it's been really hard for you to find an astrologer, especially with your illness, that could just really give you like talk straight with you. And I feel like through that process, you found some people,
Mhm.
astrologers that you really like and admire.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing
Yeah.
it? I mean, are they public?
Yes. Oh
Anybody
yeah,
listening
totally. I
wants
mean,
to know something where they can dive.
yeah. Yeah, no, I can't say enough about the that Adira Osland does. Like they yeah, they are able to, and like, because they're so well versed in both geotish
Yeah.
and in um, you know, Hellenistic study, like their ability to sort of talk me through like they didn't really do medical astrology, but they are able, geotish is sort of is different than Hellenistic astrology in some ways because it doesn't have this sort of like, oh god, we can't talk about the body. It's like very much grounded in the body in the way that like sometimes astrology is not. Like Western, like what the how do you what Western air quote astrology is not. And so that has been extremely helpful. I'm forgetting someone who else gave me a really good reading. Uh, oh, well, Johanna Hedda did,
Okay.
and they do medical astrology. They studied under Judith Hill,
Oh, wow.
so
Um, Adira am I pronouncing Adira's last name Osland? I'm gonna I fuck up every name.
yeah, I might have fucked it up too.
What's
Like
it?
an
Yeah.
eternal reader.
So the interesting thing about, right, Jyotish is because it's part of the larger system, right? It was never sort of divorced from like
Right.
Ayurveda, right? Which is like we could
Mhm.
say
Mhm.
a branch of, I'm gonna fuck this up, Indian medicine, right? So it feels
Mhm.
like maybe that's what's so profound about Jyotish is because it easily kind of like if you study Jyotish, you can study Ayurveda, and there's all of these systems that feel like they are like building blocks
Yes,
naturally.
absolutely.
There's that
And
natural
like,
connection.
yeah, yeah. So like I that just was like really helpful. Um and like Adira is one of those like really smart, like really good-hearted people who's been willing to like continue to just like have conversations with me on the fly as I sort of secretly study geotish.
I think my one of my mentors, Mickey Pellerano, is studying with Adira.
Mhm. Yes. Oh
And
yeah. Yeah. I really value the elections that he posts every month.
Oh yeah, Mickey's great, and I feel like I did the same thing. Like every month, I'm pretty much just like, so what are you learning, Mickey?
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
feel like,
totally.
doesn't it kind of feel like, in a sense, um, as someone who studied like Hellenistic, do you just sometimes, I feel like once in a while there's just the urge, because it almost feels like studying Jyotish means like, okay, let me just like
Mhm.
throw the table over and just
Mhm.
like start from scratch. But it's very like tempting at moments because it does. I feel like it's just so much. Not that Hellenistic can't do it, but sometimes I feel like you're dealing with pieces that feel very separate, whereas Jyotish offers this whole body of wisdom.
Yeah. Yes, I would totally agree with that. I think, um, since the sort of revival of studying traditional
Yeah.
astrology, as those texts have been translated, there has been an obsessive focus, and rightfully so, on technical prowess and technical know-how within astrology. And like I have Virgo fucking ruled my 10th house. Like I'm here for that. And at the same time, um, my Venus and North Node and Pisces in the fourth house is like very much alarmed and concerned with how easily we want to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater sometimes in favor of like, oh, like if I can just get this right detail, like all of the nitty gritty down, like, um, this is how you know a person, this is how you know God, this is how we're going to fix ourselves and the world around us by proxy. And I'm like, you know, um, that's all fine and well, and we should totally know that. And also, like, you can't do fucking anything without slotting intuition, room for intuition, and room for play, and room for the ineffable. And like, um, I like how that as far as I've studied and as far as I know,
Yeah.
hasn't quite been so lost to Jyotish.
Yeah. This is a great segue to something I'm really excited to talk to you about.
Okay.
As we talk
Okay.
about the sort of rigidity in the ninth house and maybe the fifth house. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
in on your Substack, and I can't remember, is this a free or is this a paid subscription post that I'm referencing, just so people know? The one on your Tarot Apprentice.
Oh, it's free. That was a
Awesome.
free
Okay,
post.
so this is free. Everyone can read this. By the way, I highly, highly recommend um subscribing to your Substack. It's very affordable for the
Thanks.
year. It's like what I don't
Mhm.
want to give prices. Is it?
It's 40
It is. Okay,
$40
cool.
for the
That's what I
year.
thought. Okay, yeah. So
Mhm.
definitely worth it, everyone. It's actually I'm serious. It's one of the few, it's the one of the few subscriptions of like print thing, like print. It's printed on
Yeah,
my
yeah,
screen that I actually read and get excited about.
yeah.
So I'm referencing, you have
Thank you.
this Substack, what is the name of this one called? Tarot Apprentice, I believe is the title, right?
Yeah,
It's about your Tarot Apprentice.
yeah.
But in this really
Mhm,
fantastic essay, you go on, you talk about the differences between tarot and astrology. Maybe there some of you get in some of the historical, which is really
mhm,
beautiful. But kind of thinking about that sort of Virgo rigidity, right? You had have a very you have an academic background, as you said, so it tends toward,
mhm,
right, that's like the,
mhm,
we could say it, the serious. And it's
mhm,
interesting because you found tarot before
mhm,
astrology. And I'm
mhm.
wondering if tarot for you was such a relief because it was a sense of playfulness and it was something of breaking up. And even since you've I'm going to pause there before I start quoting you to
Okay.
elaborate on that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It was, I found tarot at this like sort of crisis point in my academic career where I was fucking sick of teaching. I was sick of the politics of my English department. I was sick of doing all of this work for so little pay. I was like, there's no fucking way I'm going to finish my dissertation. I was also really struggling with um, an eating disorder, really struggling with just chaotic drinking. And I was like, I am spinning out. And I had, you know, like fucking illness has been my life, man. Like, um, but I had already done 2 stints in rehab, like inpatient treatment for my eating disorder and for
Okay.
addiction, in my 20s. So this was like I had just turned 30. So it was like, like Saturn return stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, um, I don't know what to do because I'm not going back to rehab. That hasn't worked. And I need money and I'm gonna feel like shit if I don't finish this PhD because I really do care about my students and I care about my writing and fuck man, like I've dragged my partner to Nebraska for this. Like we've got to make it work. By that point we loved Nebraska, but still like we were East Coast babies before that.
Yeah.
And it was so weird. I remember it vividly. I was sitting in my little office in my house in Nebraska, like, and I had these like shelved walls of books. And I was just like looking for like what book can save me? Like, is there a book that can save me? I'm always looking for the next book that will like pull me through. So like I don't, stop living. And I saw these tarot cards
Yeah.
and I was like, "What the fuck are those?" Like, I do not remember buying them. Like, I don't know how they got there. I don't remember buying them. I didn't remember buying the book. It was called The Creative Tarot by Jessica Crispin. And I was like, "Okay." And I pulled them down and I was more interested in the book at first. And the way Jessica Crispin was writing about the tarot was beautiful and brilliant and incredibly moving. Um, and she was writing about using the tarot to write. Like she is
Okay.
a writer first and foremost. And I was like, you know what? I I'm going to turn over these cards every day. I have no idea what they are. I don't know what they mean. And I am going to use them to write my manuscript, my dissertation, which
Yeah.
was a memoir and essays, and to get sober and to like encourage full participation in my life instead of being afraid of it. And I did. Like it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like way too easy. Like there's no way she was actually an addict. There's no way like her life was actually as bad as it was, but it was. It was like incredibly hard. Like I would have
Yeah.
mornings where I would cry and rage because I wasn't allowing myself to drink or throw up into the toilet or whatever. Sorry, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning,
Yeah.
whatever. Um like it was so hard, but like there was something about these cards and the sense of play, the sense of like what will be the next one that I turn over and can I trust this as a force outside of myself that seemingly has no sort of real weight behind it except as a deck of cards and like will that help me do the things that I so desperately want to do and stop doing the things that I'm using to distract myself from true desire. And I did it, and it was like, "Oh, fuck." And then, like, I began to notice that the cards didn't just tell me stories about myself, but I could begin to reliably understand, like, what kind of things I would see in my day, what kind of experiences my
Yeah.
friends would have, or my students, like, by using the cards. Like, I would flip over the tower and I would know that the student who was coming into my office to talk about his essay was going to have a breakdown about his sense of masculinity in his family and like how like this essay about guns that I was going to get really mad at him about for the way he wrote about them was actually going to be instead a complete new way for him to think about his relationship to his father and his father's relationship to his grandfather. And so like, it was one of those things where the cards were like game. They were part game,
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
sort of therapy device, but more and more it was like uncanny. I had been like a fucking tried and true atheist up to this point after coming from this evangelical Baptist family that had really fucked me up. But I began to like actually believe in them. Like it turned me on to belief and to the understanding that there were things that couldn't be explained about the world and about cause and effect. Like that cause and effect actually didn't work always the way we thought it worked or the way I heard it explained in like the scientific method. And so it was just like, yeah, it was like shit. Of course it was a relief. It was a relief. It was God. It still is God for me. Um yeah.
It's in my brain, right? When you talk about like eating disorders and addiction, right? My first thought goes to this is a person who spends an inordinate amount of time thinking about, not necessarily doing that often, but thinking about like psychedelics.
Mm,
Random side note, I was thinking like, oh, like I myself have the profound experience, and you hear about people who do, whether it's like iboga or like ayahuasca, and they have these like really profound psychedelic
mhm.
experiences.
Yes.
But I think what it is, and it's interesting, I've had some profound experiences through like talismanic magic and like
Mhm. Yes.
therapy. So my brain's thinking, okay, like what's at the heart of these things is story, right? I think that's the thing. People have
Mhm.
these psychedelic experiences, or but what's happening isn't necessarily a physical thing, but if they're going through and they're uh rewriting a story, and then they wake up with a different story, and then their view of the world sort of changes. And so it's interesting that
Mhm.
like for you, maybe like I want to use the word spirit just as a catch-all, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
sound like a certain particular person right now, but like maybe spirit knew that the way to catch you was
Yeah,
was
yeah.
was through story, right? You, because as a writer and someone who's devoted your life to story, it was like, ha, we're gonna find her the tarot, right? And maybe the tarot
Yes.
worked because it was able to shift your narrative and your way of seeing your own story and the
Mhm.
stories around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just finished this great, well, 2 great fantasy series where there's like a tarot analog in each of the series.
Yeah.
And so there, it's not tarot, but it's like in one of the series, it's called Pattern. And like the reason why I love these series is because the authors get to like secretly wax philosophical about why and how like actual tarot works. And like
Yeah.
the one I just finished last night was talking about this. It's like it allows us like the line between the line between coherence and madness is like not a line in it at all. It's just
Mhm.
this blurry boundary.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the really beautiful things about tarot is that it helps borrow from madness, borrow from like delusion and
Yeah.
intuition and seeing patterns and all of these disparate things that really shouldn't be linked, and helps bring them into a certain kind of coherence that still leaves like the little holes open for like madness to come through. And so it's like, oh, fuck. It's like, like it's that feeling. It's like you're flirting with illness. You're flirting with mental illness. You're
Yeah.
flirting with being fucking crazy. And like if we like sort of shoved ourselves like fully into that sort of primordial spirit, we probably would, like that's the thing that Jung said, right? The waters that the psychic swims in are the same ones that the drunk drowns in. That's what he told fucking James Joyce, when he was
Yeah.
trying to figure out why he was brilliant and why his daughter was a schizophrenic. Um, and so tarot for me was able to walk me back from being sick and being crazy through storytelling into something that cohered just a little bit better, but still left room for the sick and the crazy. Because more and more, I like really kind of believe that what Olga Tokarczuk, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature years back, says in her book, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, where like the main character in that book is this old hermit woman who's an astrologer trying to solve a murder in her little seaside town. And she says something like, sometimes I believe that only the sick are truly well. And I think that tarot sort of, like, and a lot of people are going to take issue with that right now, these days, particularly because like we like to like sort of stake our claims to illness as a way to sort of get what's ours. And we don't like to think of ourselves as well, even when we are sick. But tarot helped me do both, and like has continued to help me do both. And so it absolutely is the storytelling. That's exactly why that was the hook for me.
You know, just as a aside here, but in another, I'm in this sort of psychedelic coaching course through Psychedelics Today, which is really wonderful.
Ooh,
And
cool.
one of the conversations, it's so interesting how these worlds kind of dovetail. It's like there's like so much of what they're dealing with is like it's like a tool in magic, but they don't quite get there. And so someone was having this question about in one of the classes. It was like, you know, like you hear about these people who have really intense like psychedelic experiences and they forget who they are and they do terrible things because the voice told them. And this is one of the questions. And it's like, well, how do you start to figure out? I brought this question to my friend Gabe Rosas, who you know, who's a brilliant astrologer. Like, I was like asking kind of him this question, like how, you know, because it feels like a very magic. This is maybe a cross with magic, right? People who start doing a lot of magic, right? You start talking to things talk back, right? So there's this idea of that kind of madness of like, whose voice is mine, right? Like, how do you get grounding? And I love that Dave's answer was like, well, you practice tarot. Like, this is what you have. You have it to sort out, to figure out whose voice is who. And I just loved that.
Yes, absolutely. Man, I really loved his talk at Norwalk. I was so glad I was able to go to that.
Oh, he's so good. Have you just a side note, Gabe Rosas is just like a brilliant like secret weapon. He's one of these people that just is very like sort of talk about people, right, being hidden, right?
Yes.
It's like you start to realize when you meet certain people, you're like, fuck, like you are like one of the best astrologers. But I would never know about you because you're spending all of your time reading and studying, because reading and studying are very cadent occupations, right? You can't put all your energy into being the spotlight all the time and actually be doing the things it takes to be a great practitioner, astrologer, wise person.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so drawn to Gabe is like has a ton in his fifth house or whatever, but I am really I associate that with the fifth house, like this ability to like find and do and create pleasure, art,
Yeah.
knowledge without the need to sort of like immediately throw it out there into that 11th house world, trying to find friends and networks and audiences for it. And yet we need the 11th house, right? We like there comes a point, you know, like none of us are Emily Dickinson, who just wrote about like we don't get to be her. But she also like very much struggled during her lifetime with being her. You know, she had no I hope she knows somewhere that you know how much we revere her now. But yeah, just like but I love I think that sort of in an increasingly online, increasingly fragmented, increasingly anxious world, it's rare and lovely to find people who are just doing that. And I love to when then other people do have that sort of 11th house star power ability to make connections, find audiences for work, then help out, use it for like people beyond their own sort of egoic needs and wants. And I think, or I don't know, fuck, this is embarrassing because I'm like admitting that I've like thought so much about this person who I don't know and he doesn't know me, but I've thought a lot about Gabe recently because I had no idea who the fuck he was until Norwalk. And then it's like since Norwalk, I've seen and heard a
Yeah.
lot of really prominent people recommend and talk about his work from all of these different corners of astrology and divination. And that's really exciting to me. And he seems like someone who's really deserving of it. And yeah, I'm always like, I love that. I love that in literature. I love that In tarot. I love that in astrology. I love that even in my own sort of like friend communities. So it's cool.
So just to no need to be embarrassed, because one of the beautiful things about Gabe is not only is he brilliant and like one of the kindest humans I know, um, he's also like like such a champion of everyone, right? So I'm
Yeah.
sure that he watched our talk at least part of it, or has seen you and has heard about you too,
Oh,
and
cool.
also you have a quite the reputation yourself. So
Oh, shit.
yeah, so
Really?
maybe
I don't know about that, man. I've been like bitching to myself the last few days because motherhood's been really hard and like whenever parenting gets hard, like my partner and we've been together for 10 years, like we're real good. But whenever parenting is just, has just like thrown everything into this like new world along with cancer. And so it's like when parenting gets hard, then we start sniping at each other. And then like, I'm like, fuck. Like, I feel so insignificant. And then I have to do that thing of reminding myself there's medicine and insignificance. And so, like, like, also, I did this stupid thing for so long, all of my 20s, tied into the eating disorder, where I was like, I'm going to be the prettiest and most famous in all the land. Like, it seems like that would be impossible now because I look like a 7-year-old, you know, in a 35-year-old's body. But so now I'm like trying to lean into the thing where it's like, I'm gonna wear the t-shirt that I want to wear and I'm gonna do my work in bed. And that feels really good. But then there are moments where it just feels like kind of dark because it is lonely. Like I've sort of like set up these moral parameter or not
yeah.
moral, ethical parameters for how I am gonna work as a writer and as an astrologer and as a tarot reader and the things that I'm not gonna do. But by not doing certain things, I'm constantly wondering, like, am I echoing into the void? That sort of thing. And I think that a lot of us feel that way.
They're like so much there.
Yes.
We know something kind of to grasp on. It's interesting. You said the most brilliant and pretty in all the land, and like,
No, yeah.
talking maybe like bring Venus into this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think
God,
about a lot, like I think about Venus.
abandoned me. She's abandoned me. Oh, it's like a constant preoccupation. It's so embarrassing. But like, at some point we have to like lose the thing that the North Node really wants us to have. So anyways, not to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was thinking about this too, right? I'm wondering in some ways, right? Like the feeling of insignificance. I mean, it's real, especially if like in the internet land, right? Like, and especially you're busy with parenting, you're probably, and you're not teaching, you're probably not around people. Like, people do a lot to remind us of who we are. Like, I feel like I have to get
Right.
coffee every morning. Like, I go to the coffee
Yeah.
shop so I can see people.
Yeah.
And I can be like, well, hi, you're a
Yeah.
person. And I could be like, cool, I know some people in the world. I am not
Yeah.
this weirdo who lives solely on a screen. But I'm wondering in some ways there's something like fucked up because I think like as a woman, right? Like Venus always doesn't work to our favor. I think of so many like the way that we don't like we live in a culture that's very, I think in some ways like anti-Venus of like, oh, you're pretty, you can't be smart. And it's interesting. And I'm wondering like having to explore like, this culturally beauty but versus like this sort of change in your life. Like I'm wondering if you thought about those Venus things. And I'm wondering if it like kind of works for you in some strange way. I don't know. I was thinking about like Nico. Didn't Nico like when there's all these like famous women who sort of intentionally sort of marred themselves or made themselves look like taken more seriously?
Yeah, I mean, like that is true. I was like wanted to have my cake and eat it too. Like I wanted to be like really pretty and like also be recognized. I wanted people to like see me and be like, wow, she's pretty. And then I wanted people to hear me speak and be like, wow, she's even smarter than she is pretty. Like, yeah, and like that's so embarrassing to admit, but I'm all about admitting it now
Yeah.
because like, well, I mean, like I've written about it a lot. Like
Yeah.
the fucking book, if I ever like do find the right publisher for it, is all about like how my illness was tied from a very early age to beauty. And like that is that sort of like corrupting influence of the North Node with Venus, with this exalted Venus on Fomalhaut in Pisces. And you know, it didn't work. Like even when like, even when that statement could have been something that someone said, it didn't work because like I was the hungry dragon. Like I wanted more, I wanted more, I wanted more. I was killing myself out of the desire for more. And so like I know it's like not very kosher or enlightened to believe that we cause our own illnesses.
Yeah.
And like I'm not saying that my like desperate desire to be beautiful gave me breast cancer. I don't really believe that, but I do sort of wonder about this idea of like karmic debt, and like my body couldn't take on the debt of trying to fulfill heteronormative beauty standards anymore. Like you do something to yourself when you don't nourish yourself for, 2 decades. And like one of the and like so people think it's really weird like when I talk about cancer and I'm like, not the sign, me having
Yeah.
cancer. When I talk about that and like I'm constantly sort of like fixated on the loss of my hair or the loss of my eyebrows or how like I can't control how large my cheeks have gotten. And I do like, right? Or like the fact that like I'm on this hormone therapy that literally leaches minerals from my bones and like takes away the youth from my skin, like all of this stuff. And and yet like for me death is inevitable. I mean it's inevitable for all of us. And so the lesson has really been like learning like who I am without the crutch of like being immediately recognizable as someone who fulfills Western beauty standards. Like it's been the poison and the absolute blessing of this experience. And so to your point about like how hard Venus can be for women or cis women or even femmes, women identifying people or whatever in the Western world, I absolutely think so. And I like to think about, I've been like very engaged with all the old myths of Venus as this jealous, envious, competitive goddess who like in some ways that becomes her downfall. Or thinking about Helen as, the great Italian writer Roberto Calasso writes about Helen. Like Helen wasn't even allowed to be a person. She was just this mirage for people to project desire and war and bitchiness and emptiness onto. So like it's been like quite the thing.
We're running out of time and I want to like there's again
Yeah.
multiple strands, right? And maybe I'll just say this. It's interesting that you spoke so about the north wow, that's intense. North Node on Fomalhaut. Why can't I pronounce the
Well,
stars?
no, yeah,
No.
my Venus is on Fomalhaut. The North Node is past it.
Okay, but they're
Yeah,
sharing
they're co-present.
they're
Yeah.
co-present in Pisces. And I love that. I was reading 2 pieces of yours this morning. I was reading the piece you wrote on Emily Dickinson and the South Node, and then I was reading this piece on she had her South Node in the 5th house, and then we had this piece you were writing about your tarot apprentice, but also a little bit about it, the history of apprentice tarot. And I think that there was this part of this conversation that was very much like, okay, South Node, 5th house, topics I want to get here, and maybe we'll do them separately.
Yeah.
Throughout this, right, you talked a little bit about the North Node experience. How do you think the South Node has showed up for you and maybe or taught you about working with the South Node?
Well, I mean, so I was talking with Travis Black,
Yeah.
Mystic, another favorite astrologer, and yeah, just like a really great friend that's developed
Yeah.
over the last several months. It's been
Yeah.
awesome. I was talking with him about the South Node a couple days ago because I don't know, we were just ripping on it,
Yeah.
talking about shit.
Yeah.
And I was, I had mentioned to him how it was really interesting to me that in Vedic astrology, the South Node rules houses, like rules the physical structure of a home.
Okay.
And how that seems ironic or paradoxical or an anathema to the idea that the South Node is also like this place of spiritual asceticism or gain, like the structure of a home, like, and I was like, thinking like, oh, like the South Node, like it's like points to this idea that like however sort of spiritually transcendent we want to be, like we still need to be housed, we still need to have a physical place for the body to rest or our body of work to rest, whether that work is writing, whether it's spirituality, whatever it is. But it also like plays with this idea of like no matter how permanent that structure seems,
Yeah.
it it's still going to rot away. It's still subject to the rules of materialism, which is that everything decays. Um, and so I was thinking about that a lot, and I was thinking about just how confusing the South Node is for so many of my clients, for myself, for um, my friends and family. And for me, that confusion revolves around writing. It revolves around my career because I mean, before, we started this conversation talking about like
Yeah.
how do we say who I am, like or what it is that I do. But like since I was 4 years old, I had called myself a writer. Like that's always been the thing that I knew that I was good at. Like I knew that I was good at it. People identified me as being good at it. I've won like national awards in poetry and reporting and creative nonfiction, right? Like it's just something that I'm good at. It's the South Node is where we have an obvious talent.
Yeah.
That talent that like seems to come from elsewhere, that comes from spirit. And it's also the drain in our chart. It's where stuff falls away or disappears or gets ghosted and in
Yeah.
all senses of the word. And for me, my South Node is conjunct my midheaven in Mercury. I mean, in Virgo. So it's like the thing that I feel best at and most talented at in the world is writing, is telling stories. And for whatever reason, well, because of the South Node, it has been so hard to have sort of like the kind of success or reputation, which is like, oh, really? I have a reputation? The kind of success and reputation that normally would go along with someone who has written for as long as I have, and not to sound like arrogant, but
Yeah.
at the
No,
caliber that I have, like
sure.
just to like, and it's like like I start to have some sort of like outward material success and it just slips through my fingers. And so like the thing that I have to deal with over and over again in my South Node is sort of like making myself understand that the pursuit of a writing career, of a
Yeah.
storytelling career, of being Cameron Steele, the writer, storyteller, astrologer, is still important, even if I'm never gonna like be the famous writer that I thought I was gonna be when I was 10. Even if I'm not even gonna be like, whatever, like someone with thousands of followers on Instagram, like it's like having to like bow before that. Like I am a writer, I'm a talented writer. It will always be the underpinning of my career efforts. And I have to deal with that South Node ghost shit.
Do you think maybe part of that, I'm going to be a budget black market therapist for a moment.
Please.
Do you think part of that South Node story, though, is a little bit of maybe like being afraid of being seen, right? Thinking about,
Oh
right,
yeah.
like you're like chaotic drinking, like eating disorder, but then also thinking about this idea that when I first talked to you, I was like, Professor Cameron Steele.
Oh yeah.
Got your name right this time. And you were like, oh, no, you don't have to call me professor. You know, you're like, I don't necessarily. And do you think there's, in some ways, there's a part of you that's like, I want it so much, but part of you that's actually like a little bit of like, I actually don't want to be in the spotlight all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely that. There's like self-sabotage going on. There's like abstention going on. There's like a real big struggle with being visible for a lot of different reasons. That I won't go into here.
Sure.
But yes, it is definitely, there is definitely part of me that's sort of like keeping myself out, even as I so desperately wish that someone would come along and wave a magic wand and be like, oh my God, what she has to say is really interesting. And the way she has to say it is really beautiful. Right.
I'm just thinking the response is like, oh man, like is there in your brain, coming back to this earlier conversation about like the institutionalization, institutionizing of things, right? If someone had come to you in like your 20s and been like, I don't know, famous authors, like, I don't know, just like that person who wrote like Eat, Pray, Love or something, and was like, here's endless budget to like write, like, I don't know, like this popular book. It's like, maybe that would, it's like, I think maybe secretly in your brain, you're like knowing that there's maybe a certain amount of like worldly success that corrupts.
Yeah, no, it's like, I mean, part of that has always been part of my ethos. Like, I'm not gonna do the Liz Gilbert thing. Like in my 20s, I was definitely like, fuck that. But now, like I'm in my mid 30s and again, I'm looking down a shorter lifespan than most women in their mid 30s. And I'm like, oh, but I would just like, can I just have like a little bit of attention here? And at the same time, it's just like, but I don't want it if it means that I have to like compromise certain values and if I have to change my language. Like, I feel very concerned about the sort of generic, uninspiring language that people talk in all of the time and write in all of the time because they're afraid of, the cancellation gods.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Those are real. I'm so sorry. Hopefully when we get
I
this
love it.
You're just hearing my dog, like, just,
we love it.
She's just, oh, okay. Can we just, this is a really great way. Can we end on your dog? Can you tell us a little about?
Sappho. This is Sappho. She is an oracle poet, priestess.
So your dog lost her eyes at 2, you said? For those?
Yeah, she was 2. She's a Leo, and it was a really hard year. So she lost her eye. Remember that, the Great American Leo eclipse?
Yeah.
That we all could see. So she lost her eyes directly after that. A rare autoimmune disease that is only supposed to affect huskies, and for some reason affected her. It's like where her body attacks pigment, and she's a white dog, so the pigment that it attacked was the pigment in her eyeballs. And this was going on around the same time it was like right after my first wedding anniversary.
Okay.
And we had gone camping in New Mexico, and my husband got the bubonic plague. And so he was in the hospital he was one of 2 people in the country that year. The CDC studied him. He's totally okay. I didn't get sick. But, the award-winning poem that I wrote that won the Academy of American Poets Award was a poem about the experience of him getting the plague. And that was published in 2019. And so then the plague comes, the actual plague that everyone gets comes along in 2020. And so I'm like, fucking, illness is divination. Writing is divination. So.
You have a blind dog, right? Like you have the prophet dog and your husband got the bubonic. Like, I thought that was gone. I don't even know what the
Yeah, I mean,
bubonic plague is. I just know it's something the old timey, like they talk about like the Middle
yeah,
Ages or something.
it is mostly gone, but you can still sometimes get it from fleas in that sort of southwestern region. If a flea has like bit a prairie dog in the prairie, it's endemic to prairie dogs in that region, the bubonic plague. And the flea bit Kieran, my husband, after biting a prairie dog. That's sort of the hypothesis of what happened. And so he had to have like surgery and like get this like pustule sac removed from his throat. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy he's okay.
Yeah, no, he's great. I mean, he's doing it. He's an artist. He's tired dad. He's tired of me being sick. But he's great.
Where this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. Truly, truly. Where can people
Yeah.
find you?
So the best way to find me is either my Instagram, which is this handle. I put it up.
Yep.
Sometimes when people Google me, it doesn't show up. I'm like wondering if Instagram has shadow banned me or something, even though I have like, barely 300 followers. That's fine. It's cool. I don't need my family finding it and being like, oh my God, she actually is a witch. Burn it. And then you can find me at my Substack. You can Google Cameron Steele Interruptions, or the actual website is steelecs.substack.com. I write a free essay every Wednesday. I
Yeah.
publish a free essay every Wednesday, and then there are paid essays on astrology, tarot, and then monthly tarot scopes every other week, basically, on Sunday.
Yeah. And as I've mentioned before, it's some of my favorite reading. Do you have I'm sorry, I missed this. Do you have like besides the Substack, do you have you're redoing your website right now, is that correct?
Yes, I gotta do that. I need to figure, and I'm eventually gonna like make the Substack thing. I need to do all,
Okay.
like this is like yeah. So the website is CameronScottSteele.com. You can
Okay.
go there and still find my newsletter, and you can also find all my academic work if you are so interested.
Well, I was gonna say if people are interested in finding your poetry and some of the other stuff you've alluded to, Cameron Scott Steele. So either like Google that or go to your website. There'll be links there.
Yep, CameronScottSteele.com, and then anything that I've published, poetry, creative nonfiction, that sort of thing, that can be linked to is linked to there. And then there's some stuff that are just like in print literary mags. So
Fantastic. And then you are a consulting astrologer and tarot reader. So your books are open. So people can go to your website to book with you. Is that where people
yes,
book?
yep. The Calendly link is on my website. It's on my Instagram bio, and I put it at the top and bottom of every newsletter I publish. So
Okay. Oh, last question. This is very because I know you mentioned last time we talked about like a 2-card reading, how to sign up for. Is that like a monthly thing? Because I feel like I did it like I had trouble, so other people might have having trouble. Tell me about,
Oh.
are you doing like a tarot offering and how do I do this?
Yes, it's a 2-card reading. You shouldn't have trouble. Some
Is it
people have.
is it through your Substack or is it through your
It's Calendly. It's through my Calendly.
Got it. Got
So
it. Okay.
so if you go to my Instagram and you click on, it's like calendly.com/interruptions all together. And
Okay.
the first offering on the Calendly link is a 2-card tarot draw, which is a written or recorded. You get to decide whether you want me to speak to you or write to you about your question
I
using
love that.
2
Oh,
card.
and is that like the monthly or is that just like an offshoot? So that's one of the offerings you have. Why did I think you were doing like a subscription for a monthly reading? Or I just made that up in my brain.
Um, well, I was. So one of the things that I tried to do to generate more audience would be
Okay.
like, hey, like if you're a paid subscriber and you want to write into me, I will answer your 2-card tarot reading for free as
Got it. Got it.
your subscription for the Sunday newsletter. But I only had one person write in, so I stopped doing that. But if you want to do that, I would love to.
Okay, good. Because okay,
So,
that's cool. But also I love the fact that you um do the 2-card readings, you do astrology readings. So you have a whole offering,
yeah.
reading
Yep. Yeah.
offering
Yes.
menu.
Natal
That's the word.
chart, 2-card tarot reading. I'm about to list a reading about the nodes called Want and Repel. So talking about that nodal story, because I get a lot of clients with like really eclipsey charts, and I thought maybe I should just like do a smaller reading that's like focused on this for people.
I love that. I always get a lot of nodal stories and clients as well. But
Mm.
Cameron Steele, it was lovely. So follow
Yes,
your
you too.
interruptions and all the places. Cameron Scott Steele is the website, and I
Yes.
am Vivi Henriette of Art of the Zodiac, and I do these talks every week. I do IG lives. We had a really wonderful IG live. So subscribe in all the places for me, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. This is great.
Okay. Bye.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.